Is CCIP the catalyst that Link has been waiting for? Let's discuss. So, hey everyone, welcome back to Upside Down Data. Today I want to talk about the launch of the cross-chain interoperability protocol that Chainlink just did a couple days ago on the 17th, and what it might mean for Link going forward. So if you're not familiar with what CCIP is, it's basically a protocol that's designed to allow for general interoperability across different blockchains. So allow kind of any different blockchain to talk to any other different blockchain using CCIP. And so it'll enable things like bridging of assets, but also cross-chain governance and a whole bunch of other things. And as I record this tomorrow on June 20th, there will be the CCIP will become available on a bunch of different test nets. So there are 5 different test nets that it'll first be going live to. I imagine there's going to be more that are going to be coming out. And that's where people are going to be able to kind of get their hands on it and start actually trying to play with it and using it. And I'm sure that we'll learn a lot more about it as different developers start to interact with it on those different test nets. But what's really cool about CCIP, in my opinion, is what it enables. So in this blog post that Chainlink had put out, they do list a number of different possible use cases down here. I'm not going to go through all of these, it lists a decent number of them. But the one that I wanted to highlight is probably the most basic, but in some ways potentially, at least in the current moment, maybe the most important. And that is the ability to bridge assets and not have to rely on other different bridging solutions that are native to a specific blockchain. And the reason why I think this is so important is that if Chainlink can nail this with CCIP to have a bridging solution that is secure and is reliable, I think that in and of itself would be a huge demand driver for this, because we already know that a lot of the existing bridges that are out there in crypto are not very secure. It's constantly the case that they're getting hacked. And one that happened more recently that was pretty massive deal especially for certain ecosystems, was the multi-chain fiasco. I'm not going to go into depth, but essentially multi-chain was this bridging protocol across a bunch of different chains, and it more or less kind of collapsed in a very short amount of time. And of course, the problem with that is that there were some ecosystems that relied very heavily on multi-chain for bridging in different assets. So for example, Phantom was actually a chain where its DeFi ecosystem heavily relied on multi-chain, because Phantom actually didn't, to my understanding, Phantom did not have native support for some of the major stablecoins like USDC or USDT. And so they were relying on multi-chain to bridge those stablecoins into the Phantom network so that they could be used in that ecosystem. And as you can imagine, if you suddenly lose your stablecoins, and that's what's happened, now that multi-chain has basically collapsed, all of those stablecoins that were bridged in using multi-chains have totally depegged from the dollar, or trading at cents now, relative to the dollar. You can't really have, at least in kind of the current state of DeFi, a very functional DeFi ecosystem without good stablecoins or without kind of reliable stablecoins. And so it's led to a massive kind of drawdown in Phantom total value locked. And it's really posing a kind of existential crisis or existential challenge for the Phantom DeFi ecosystem. And so given that, given kind of how this is such an important thing in the current state of crypto, to have these bridges, and then more importantly, have them be reliable, that they're not just going to rug pull, it's not just going to disappear and then, take down the entire, DeFi ecosystem in a chain along with them. If Link can nail that with CCIP, that in and of itself would be huge. And of course, that's just one of the possible use cases. Another one that kind of caught my eye that I just wanted to mention quickly that I thought was interesting is, so they mentioned this in the context of gaming specifically, this idea of using CCIP so that you could kind of store really important assets from a game, for example, on a more secure blockchain, like maybe Ethereum. But then when you're actually, interacting with things and transacting, you might use a more scalable blockchain that's cheaper. I actually think that this is a bigger, kind of a more interesting thing than just gaming, and this could actually just go more generally across crypto assets itself. One of the things that I think is really interesting here is that, with Ethereum being kind of the biggest L1, the most secure, I think a lot of people would argue just because of the kind of money behind it, that staging any kind of attack on Ethereum would be very difficult, basically impossible, given how big it is. One of the things that I think is interesting here is that we've seen this big drive for layer 2 solutions on Ethereum, Optimism, Arbitrum, etc., being kind of the more prominent names. But one of the things that's really interesting about CCIP is that technically what this would allow you to do is to keep all of your assets on Ethereum, which, arguably is the most secure place to have them just from a protocol standpoint. But then if you wanted to do any kind of transaction, let's say you wanted to use a DEX or you just wanted to kind of move things around, you could also do this with NFTs. Let's say you wanted to transact NFTs, you might store them on Ethereum, but maybe go to a cheaper place to move them. You wouldn't have to use an Ethereum L2 to do that. You could go to any kind of more scalable blockchain that's out there that has, liquidity for what you might be wanting to do. Like you're going to be using a DEX to swap some tokens. And so, for example, you can imagine that a world where, let's say we're in another bull market, fees on Ethereum are really expensive and no one really wants to transact, on DEXs on Ethereum because it's just prohibitively expensive. You could potentially use CCIP to bridge those assets to something that's more scalable. Let's say, for example, Solana or maybe Avalanche or something like that. And then use a DEX there to make your swap and then just bridge, using CCIP, just take the tokens back over to Ethereum and keep them there. And so I think that's a really interesting idea because it kind of lets other chains, in a way, kind of act like L2s just to kind of a butchered sense, but kind of getting the functional benefit of an L2 without actually having to be an Ethereum L2 and deal with all of those kind of issues. You literally have Solana settling a lot of DEX, transactions, and then people just storing them over on Ethereum. Now, obviously, the viability of that is probably going to be a bit dependent on what the fee structure ends up being for CCIP, how expensive it ends up being to bridge things one way or the other. But it's just an interesting thing that I thought of, and I thought it was kind of interesting that they kind of siloed themselves to gaming in this example here. I think this actually could be a much bigger thing. But it's those kind of ideas that CCIP could enable, that they really end up being able to nail it in a way that it's reliable and secure and not exploitable in any way. It opens the door for a lot of different possibilities that it kind of takes us out of this world where all these different chains are kind of siloed together and brings them into a much bigger space. And then, of course, kind of the bigger picture beyond that is to allow the bringing in of assets, from out of the blockchain world. So bringing in things from traditional finance into crypto and then vice versa. Chainlink is going to be working with Swift to do some piloting to see about using CCIP to allow Swift to interact with, blockchains, both public and private. That's kind of the long-term thing. I think for that to get any kind of real big usage, we'll have to get more regulatory clarity and all those kind of things first. But that's kind of really the long-term goal, as I understand it, for something like CCIP, is in addition to just adding a lot of functionality within crypto itself as it exists currently to actually allow for that massive pot of money that's out there in traditional finance to have easier access to the crypto space. And so given that, then, I think the thing that a lot of people look at then is, given the current market cap of Link, which is at around 3.5 billion. So here I'm just on our website, partydigital.io. Link in the description. I just pulled up the market cap over time here for Link, and currently we're sitting at about 3.52 billion. And I think what the kind of the long-term thought that a lot of people have for Link is that if it ever manages to do that grand vision of being able to act as that kind of gateway for a lot of these this capital that exists out there in traditional finance to find its way into crypto, that could be in the tens of trillions of dollars, ultimately that you're talking about there. And so when you look at that, if Chainlink is acting as this kind of key piece of infrastructure for all that amount of money, 3.5 billion looks awfully small. And I think that's kind of the larger kind of thesis a lot of people have. Now, obviously, none of this is financial advice. You should make your own opinions. And obviously, that's still speculative, right? It hasn't happened yet. It's not the case that CCIP has even gone live on the main nets of a lot of these different chains, let alone gone and brought in all this money from traditional finance. It's all speculation at this point. But that's the vision. That's, the long-term, I think, goal that a lot of people are seeing. And certainly, I think that's the goal that Chainlink has for this project. And so I think it's understanding that can help us understand why Link's price is doing what it is right now. I think a lot of people make the mistake of thinking that when some kind of bullish news or event like this happens, that it means that price just immediately has to catapult off to the upside. That's just not true. And part of the reason for that, again, is that currently a lot of that kind of bullish thought is still speculation. It hasn't happened yet. So, any kind of natural demand that might come from people actually using CCIP obviously hasn't happened yet, because CCIP isn't live on main nets of those different chains, much less, live in any sense of bringing in traditional finance into the crypto space. And so that's not going to be coming in here to boost Link's price. And then also, you just have to understand that we're in a current market condition where a lot of people aren't really all that interested in crypto, they're not really paying attention. And so, there's not a lot of speculative money coming in. And really, it would be, at this point, speculative money betting on that long-term thesis that would drive Link's price up right now. And so when you see Link, still sitting down in this range that's been in, for well over a year at this point, Link did pump on the news back on the 17th here. It pumped 8.855%, but now it's given up some of those gains. It's not really all that surprising given the kind of context we're in. I don't think we're going to go into some explosive bull market. I think more likely Link is just going to be kind of continue to be, in this accumulation zone. It might be able to break up to the upside, but before we hit all-time highs again, I would expect we'd probably be entering into a new bull market if we can, go ahead and break all-time highs, set, new all-time highs, go off to the races as we go. And so really it's a patience game, and it's really betting on the probabilities, in terms of the long term of how likely, one thinks that thesis is to ultimately play out. But then shorter term from that, we can also just look at what do the data tell us, more short term for the price of Link, and is it reasonable to at least be optimistic in the more medium term? If not, we think, in the shorter term, it's just going to go absolutely nuts. So I actually want to flip over to one of the models that we have at polaritydigital.io. If you're interested in seeing these data live for yourself, you can sign up for our Polarity Digital Pro subscription service, currently only $15 a month. We think it's an absolute steal. You get not only all of our models for Link, but also for all the other assets that we follow, currently around 37, with more support coming soon for more. So what I'm showing you here is the forecast model for Link, our forecast model for Link. And so what this does is it gives a probability of basically what is the likelihood that the price of Link will be higher than it is today 6 months in the future. That's what this is telling us. And so you can see that, in the past when Link has been going into these bullish phases, the forecast model gets really bullish, says there's a very high probability that Link's price will be up in 6 months in the future. And then, it kind of rides that wave, kind of just says up is the more likely direction. But then as we enter into the bear market, you see it falling off quite quickly as being very bearish, coming out through all of here. Then importantly, you'll see that the tide has been kind of shifting. And then in fact, as we hit the lows down here in June, see the forecast model hitting its highest level, saying that there's a 91% chance at that point in time that it was estimating that the price of Link would be up 6 months in the future. And so if we just kind of think about that, and based on what's happened in the past, generally speaking, having a forecast model this bullish has been a good sign for Link in kind of the medium term. And so that's what I'm looking at here, is that so far, the model has not seen any reason to change its forecast too meaningfully. It's currently at about 80% chance of upside, so not a huge change that's happening in this kind of overall range here. Obviously, 80% is not 100%, but it's a heck of a lot better than 10% or 7% like we were back down through here. And so I think what this is suggesting is that unless we get some kind of rug pull or really kind of cataclysm either in the traditional markets, them falling off a cliff going into recession, or some kind of just specific news within crypto or within Link itself, I think the easier direction for Link kind of in the medium term is up versus down. And so based on that, I think it's reasonable to expect that Link at the very worst might just continue to stay in this range, and then maybe, more hopefully, it'd be able to start charting a course more to the upside if broader markets allow. That's kind of what I'm seeing here. But certainly what it looks like is that, it would be surprising to me to see Link just crash back down below these unless something really extreme happened in the market. And in fact, it would not surprise me if we're gearing up for a move that could eventually break us out of this range. Not that I think it would just take us immediately back to all-time highs, but at least be kind of the first notable move outside of this range we've been stuck in for so long. If I had to put a probability on it, the data are telling me that it's probably better odds it will break out to the upside of this range than to the downside. But again, not financial advice, it's crypto. Anything could happen. Any kind of news event could change things. So then ultimately, I think when we think even longer term than that, so this is kind of the medium term up kind of outlook, but when we think about, can Link break to new all-time highs? Can it kind of move over to the upside? I think what we have to think about are a couple different important questions. The first important question that I always ask with any altcoin is, do I think it will survive to the next bull market? For me personally, I think Link is probably one of the alts that I think is the most likelihood of making it of anything. If I had to bet on any altcoin, besides Ethereum, if we don't count Ethereum as an altcoin, any altcoin making it to the next bull market, Link would be personally my number one pick. And the reason for that is, it already has massive adoption as an oracle, but then with CCIP, it has the potential to, really expand its use case to, bridging and all those other things as well. And so it's just hard for me to see a world where anything else, really is able to be as confident as I am of Link making it to the next bull market. So again, not financial advice. You should be making your own opinion about that. That's just my personal opinion. So based on that, so that's my kind of personal take. Then the next question I would ask myself is, okay, when it gets to that bull market, the next bull market, does it have a reason to be there and a reason to exceed its prior all-time high? There are plenty of altcoins that are probably going to make it to the next bull market, but for a lot of them, they probably won't have as much of a reason to exist in that bull market as they did in the first one. In the first one, there's a lot of speculation, probably a lot of promise, a lot of hype around it that those assets just didn't live up to. It just didn't end up panning out. So when you ask that question in the next bull market, should people be piling in as much as they did in the first one? Well, probably not. If they didn't manage to succeed in all that time, and if in fact the thesis has actually gotten weaker for that asset, it's probably not all that likely that they're going to make it to a new all-time high. But for something like Link, where you could say, well, not only has it been, meeting its thesis in where it existed kind of in its early history of being the Oracle, and now it's currently dominating the Oracle space, now has this new catalyst that's attached to it as well. And that could just be that other big driver of demand to the upside. It's not necessarily organic demand. This is kind of, in some ways, that's separate from whether or not CCIP has gotten a lot of adoption at that point. It's more about speculative demand. That when you're going into a bull market, speculation drives a lot of price action. And so then the question is there something there that, new entrants to the space, when they're looking and researching and checking out new assets, is there something there that's going to hook them and make them think that they want to invest in that asset, that they think it's going to be kind of a winning place to be? And I think Chainlink, in my personal opinion, probably has that with CCIP in addition to everything else it already has going for it. I think anyone who's bullish on Link, when you think about what was it that made you bullish on Link in the past, do you think that that's going to be convincing to people in the future? For me personally, I think that's probably the case. I think that it was already convincing that Link is important to just being an Oracle, but with CCIP, it's even potentially more so. I think that's a persuasive argument to anyone who's entering the space, looking around at different projects of where they think things might be going. I think Link is a reasonable one there. Not to say it's going to be the only show in town. There's always going to be other sexy new projects that are out there. But I think Link could stand well, and especially if this next bull market really ends up favoring projects that are really about utility and not just about hype and promises. It's hard for me to think of an altcoin that has more utility in crypto right now than Chainlink. It's already providing a lot of utility in the space, and CCIP has the potential for a heck of a lot more. And so it's with all those factors together that makes it just kind of seem like a reasonable bet for the next bull market. And in this kind of phase right now, we're in a current state where alts have not been doing very well against Bitcoin and Ethereum. Link has been trapped in this accumulation range. And, there's no guarantee that Link can't go further down this bear market. But, if it's the case that crypto markets ever see a new all-time high, which I think is probably likely we're going to get a next bull market, and that's, going to happen. Again, just my opinion, not financial advice, just what I'm thinking here. Then it's hard for me to think of an alt that could, potentially go further. And, not to say that I think Link will have as explosive a move as, Ethereum, but I think it's a kind of a useful comparison here that when you think about, assets, do they have a reason to exist and what can they do? ETH was definitely one of the altcoins in the prior cycle that when you were down here, you were asking the question, did an asset have a reason to exist? Well, for ETH, it was, yeah. ETH had a lot of the innovation going on. Pretty much the vast majority of innovation that was going on in things like DeFi and NFT was all starting out on Ethereum. And then you saw what ended up happening as we went into the next run. And so, it would not surprise me if in the future, we're looking back at this time and saying, well, yeah, obviously this was an accumulation zone before we broke off to new all-time highs, wherever those end up being. So, I say all this, and obviously, I think I've built a reputation that I'm not a moon boy. I don't come out here and spout just ridiculous predictions about where I think things are going. I try to stay grounded in what is realistic and what the data I think would support. But Link is one of those projects where I think in some ways it's hard for me looking at it not to be bullish on the long-term outlook based on what it has. It's one of those few altcoins that I think has been, more than meeting kind of the thesis that I think a lot of people got into it originally. And again, price action will be volatile. It doesn't mean that Link is just going to be up only. But whenever that next bull market would come, it would surprise me if Link isn't able to catch a notable bid and move to the upside as well. Now, obviously, whenever that time would come, we'd have to watch the data and see how things have been progressing to kind of evaluate at that point in time. Where I stand right now, things look pretty reasonable. So again, not financial advice. These are just my own opinions and what I'm thinking about looking at Link, but that's kind of the current state. And I think CCIP is a big deal. Obviously, we'll have to watch as that progresses and see what happens. But I think this is a great first step. I'll be excited to watch what happens as it hits these test nets and then as things go from there. All right, so if you're interested, again, in Polarity Digital Pro, go over to polaritydigital.io. Link is in the description to find out more about that. And then, of course, if you like the content or subscribe to the channel, give the video a like and follow us on Twitter. A lot of updates, better indicators, and more over there.